Hi, everyone. Welcome to Fantastic Developer Tools and Where to Find Them. I was in a very whimsical mood when I made the titles for these presentations. So if you have any good Harry Potter puns, please give them to Kai and he can present them a little bit later. Um, I don't have any other than no, I don't something about wizards. But this is a pun off of a Harry Potter movie title. Anyway, what we're going to talk about today is the different developer tools and extension points and extension features that are available in DHIS2. Some of the tools are not actually DHIS2 features, but they're things that we provide that let you build extensions to the core system. We had a great set of presentations in the previous session that went a little bit long even, about some things that people have built using these tools and on top of the platform. So this is just a little bit more under the hood of what's available. We're not going to get, unless people want to, but we're not planning to get too in the weeds of actually writing code together. This is more for a general audience, also just what is out there, what's available, what types of tools do we have, what types of extensions can you build to DHIS2, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into some of the a few of those tools. But in particular, we will also want to open it up to a discussion and questions with all of you. So as we're talking, we're going to present for a little bit, but then we'll open it up for questions, suggestions, brainstorming, thoughts of different ways you've thought about or wanted to extend the core functionality of DHIS2. And we can maybe answer some of those questions, maybe have a discussion about what might be possible in the future, talk a little bit about our roadmap, some of those types of things. So just keep that in mind as we're going through so that you can have some of those questions ready. And with that, I think we'll dive right into a quick overview of kind of where we are today, what the DHIS2 developer landscape looks like. Then I'll pass it over to Kai, who will talk about a few of the exciting newer extension points and extensibility features that are in DHIS2 version 42. Those being the global shell, different plugin points and how to build them using the app platform, as well as some new features in app management and the app hub to be able to to share and find extensions that other people have built. Then I'll talk a little bit about the Routes API, which has been expanded and improved quite a bit in version 42 and opens up a lot of possibilities for extension and application developers. And as well as talk about some of the reference implementations that we've built already to kind of give a best practice kind of foundation that other people can expand on and adapt to their needs. The two that I'll talk about specifically today involve civil registry lookup in using a Capture app plugin, as well as org unit sync, which is brand new and pretty exciting. And we'll hear a little bit more about that today, but it'll be a teaser for a more in-depth session on the developer meetup that we have in next week on next Thursday. So with that, I'll dive into this. I think I'll talk through some of it, but and hopefully we can get questions and online as well. But just raise your hand and kind of let's make this a little bit more of a dialogue. So don't hesitate to wait 40 minutes for me to finish before you ask your questions. Let's go ahead and raise your hands if you have a thought or a discussion, and we can go ahead and do it as we go along. Okay, with that, I'll talk a little bit about the DHIS2 developer landscape. I tried to give kind of a laundry list of all of the different tools and extension points that are available today. Probably I forgot some. There are a lot of little smaller pieces as well that are out there and available. And we can talk about some of those, but these are really the big ones that are possible today. And there are many, many cases where people have done other things as well that are sort of not something that is natively supported or something that we even anticipated, but other ways that people have extended DHIS2 in very innovative ways that happy to talk through, but they're not something that we have kind of as concrete support for. But first, I wanted to introduce the DHIS2 extensibility team. So my colleague Kai is here with me representing the extensibility team. I think Johan might be in the room, or he's probably in a different session. I think he's in a different session, but he's also around here in person. And we also have Mozaffar, Diana, and Claude, who may be online, but maybe you've seen their names around as well. And this team is a new kind of initiative, strategic initiative as part of DHIS2. Started just about a year ago in August of last year. And it's really kind of bringing together a lot of pieces that existed in different places within the DHIS2 core team and the DHIS2 ecosystem for a long time. I've been involved with the development of the application platform and the tools that we build, as have many of my colleagues on the core team for many, many years. But this is really kind of bringing that all into one place, putting together a more concrete and coherent roadmap for where that's going in the future, and really supporting all of you and all of the people that are building on top of DHIS2 in a more strategically kind of promoted way. So that team has been around for about a year. We put together sort of a team purpose that you can probably guess, but we're here to enable the high quality, secure, and shareable customization that adds value to DHIS2 implementations. So that includes supporting the other core DHIS2 engineering teams who are building a lot of applications and extensions, kind of first-party extensions on top of the DHIS2 core platform, but also the developer community. That's the HISP developers in different HISP groups around the world, as well as the wider developer community that there are dozens and dozens of implementations of DHIS2, which have either developers that are writing a little bit of HTML and CSS in a custom form, or an entire team of developers that are building applications, whether that be mobile apps, server-side extensions, custom web apps, all sorts of things. So our goal is to really make the lives of those people as easy as possible. And one of the ways that we want to do that is actually to prevent forking, because we all know that you can, it's all open source, right? So you could just fork DHIS2 and do whatever you want with it. But that comes with a lot of costs and a lot of time and energy that needs to be invested in maintaining that fork as the core product continues to improve, bug fixes come in, features get added, refactors happen. It becomes really, really difficult to integrate those changes into your fork. So one of the kind of goals of this team is also just to find ways to add more constrained extension points within the DHIS2 platform so that you can extend it and adapt it to in the places that you want without needing to reinvent the wheel and maintain an entire fork of the whole application. So with that, I'll talk a little bit, and this is going to be kind of a whirlwind tour of all of the different extension points that we have in DHIS2. These are a few of them that have some icons available, but I'll talk through each of these in turn. We have kind of interface extensions and different places within the system where you can extend the core interface of DHIS2. The most common and the one that's been around the longest is custom apps. So DHIS2 itself is actually made up of about 34 different web applications that are kind of encapsulated modules of functionality that run in the browser, and you can install new ones. So one of the things that we introduced just a few years ago, most of you probably know this, but is continuous release, meaning that we're no longer constrained to releasing new versions of the interface or all of those applications just once a year or once every 6 months, as we were previously doing. When we release a new version of the entire WAR file for the whole bundle, the whole server application. But each of those apps can be independently released. They're uploaded to the App Hub, which I'll talk about in a minute, and you can then install and update those applications independently. And that's also available to everyone else as well. So you can build an application in the same way that our teams do. You can build an application, you can upload new versions of it, you can install new applications. They'll show up in the system just like those 34 that are bundled in the system as well. And for a long time, we've also had plugins. So plugins in the plugins in the dashboard app. I'm actually probably getting ahead of myself because I have a slide on each of these that I will talk through. But we also have different places where you can introduce more targeted functionality extensions or customizations into the system. So on the dashboard app, you can create a custom dashboard item that just takes over a small portion of that page. It knows some of the context of what dashboard is being displayed. It allows people to kind of move those around and mix and match the different plugins that they're using. And that you can build just that one piece, and you don't need to build an entire dashboard app for yourself. You don't need to build an entire DHIS2 for yourself. This is the idea of extension points that are encapsulated places where you can extend the system in a controlled way. More recently, we've added additional extension points into the Capture apps as well, Capture app as well, which is for data entry in the in tracker and event data models. We have the ability to create custom form fields as well as to create custom ways to display information about a particular tracked entity. And Kai will talk quite a bit more about that and how we enable that as well in the developer tools that we have. That's on the website. So I do actually technically have a whole full slide on this, but I'll just breeze through that when I get to it. On the Android app side, we do have a custom Android app ourselves. And we also built that in a way that it's separated between the application and an SDK, which provides the offline first capability to interact with DHIS2 data model. The Android app can talk to that while it's offline. It has the ability to cache data, cache metadata, all of these types of things. You can build a custom Android app on top of that SDK. And I'll talk a little bit more later about some of the ways that we're looking to take this idea of smaller extension points and the ability to customize smaller pieces of the application into the Android or mobile world as well in the near future. And then we have some of the kind of under the hood extension points that are not necessarily visible to the user, but are very, very valuable to developers when they're customizing or extending the core functionality of the platform. And those include API routes. I'll mention here on the next page. Actually, I'll get to all of these on the next page, but different ways that through the API you can actually customize the behavior and the functionality of the system. So I'll talk about a few of those API features first. I will add links to all of these things and share these slides as well. So you should be able to get all of the links to these different places. But I'll point out later that we do have a kind of a centralized place where you can go to find information and documentation on all of these features that I'll talk about. The first one there, which is the only one that's linked right now, but it goes to docs.dhis2.org. You can go to the API documentation. For a very long time, and unlike many other software platforms in the space, we have a full-featured REST API that lets you do everything in the system. So like I said, we use the app platform or the way to build apps in our own development. All of those apps use this API exclusively. So we don't have any kind of private functionality that only we can do as first-party developers. Everything is available to any app developer or anybody that wants to interact with that API. So we have a very, very, very extensive and very robust way to interact with metadata and data in the system and configuration as well. But specifically related to extending the DHIS2 platform, we have a few APIs that are particularly useful when you're kind of breaking out of the box of what DHIS2 does natively. The first of those is the data store API, which is a schemaless key value store that any app developer can use to store and retrieve data and share that between different users in the system. As I mentioned, that's schemaless, so you can store whatever you want in that system. That comes with some positives and negatives, because obviously then you need to sort of manage the schema yourself. And we'll talk a little bit about some ways we want to potentially add some guardrails or the ability to define schemas and migrations for that data as well in the future. The second API is the Routes API, which is relatively new. I think it was first introduced in 39 or 40, and has been significantly improved in version 42. And what this does is addresses a problem that we were seeing, or a challenge that we were seeing a lot of customizations, extensions, app developers facing, which is how do you communicate from a custom web app that you've built using some of our tooling, some of our app platform. How do you communicate with a custom backend that you've built and do that in a secure way? So there are a few ways to kind of work around that if you want. So if you really need to do it, you can have the user in the browser authenticate with a different service as well as the DHIS2 instance. So then they need to have an account in both places. They need to know that that thing exists. They need to be able to log in there. You need to have some mechanism to do this securely across domains, potentially. You can try to kind of hijack the cookie and share it between and have your backend service check with DHIS2 to make sure that that cookie is valid. There's some technical ways that you could get around this and do it in a secure way, but we saw a lot of times people were just ignoring the security part of it and just talking to this thing that's open to the public internet, for example, or doing things that didn't scale super well in terms of security. So what we introduced with the Routes API is the ability to basically proxy through DHIS2 and perform authentication and authorization on that request before passing that on to a kind of trusted backend service. And then that DHIS2 can then authenticate with that backend service in a number of different ways. We'll talk about that in the future. We see this as something that's super valuable, but probably there's a lot more that we can do in terms of expanding on this and also making ways for it to be more scalable in the future, because you are talking through DHIS2. So if you're sending a lot of volume of data, you might want to think about performance in your particular use case. The other challenge that this addresses, which is something that is kind of a theme we want to address across the board as we're building some of these tools and extension points, is that while it was possible to create a workaround where maybe you set up an Nginx rule that checked the cookie when it came in or something, it's very hard to share, because you need to send, if you want to have someone else use this same extension, they need to set up that backend service, and then they also need to set up the proxy that does this authentication, and it becomes quite complex because they might not be using Nginx, they might be using something else. So it becomes a very challenging thing to share, unlike an application which you just upload to the App Hub and somebody can install it. So we want to make it more and more easy to build full stack extensions that you can really share and reuse in different implementations in a secure way, and be able to do it without needing to spin up a bunch of infrastructure and have a bunch of kind of server management steps to adopt those different extensions. The other one that's been around for quite some time that is often maybe overlooked in terms of an extension point or a way to extend the core functionality of DHIS2 is custom SQL views. And this has been around for a long time, but you can define custom SQL views that are then exposed through the API. So you have to be a privileged user to be able to create these views, and there are certain tables that are restricted to access, so particularly the tracked entity instance data. But this can be very valuable if you want to kind of create a custom lookup of a set of metadata and data combined, maybe, or particularly metadata. You can create a SQL view using just SQL language, so anything that looks up data in the tables of DHIS2 Postgres, and you can then have that automatically exposed to the DHIS2 API, which you can then use to authorize different access controls. The other one that's been around for a little bit shorter, I think it's been since 38 or 39, and I don't think has been used very much. We know that there's ways that we want to expand on this, is the ability to use event hooks, which is our term for basically triggering something to happen when something happens in DHIS2. Right now, that is supported for metadata changes and for scheduler events. We know that tracker events is something that people really want, which is a little bit harder from a performance standpoint, but is something that we are looking into as well. But already if you want to know as soon as some metadata changes, you want to trigger something in a different system, you can do that using event hooks. And there are a few different targets that you can use for that as well. We have, you can put that information onto a queue. You can send it as an HTTP webhook to an external system. A few different ways to configure that, as well as to filter the data that you actually want to trigger those event hooks. So this is, again, something that is a little bit of an experimental feature still, but is something that we think could have a lot of potential, and we'd really love to get more feedback on how you want to use this, what maybe if you want to play around with it and see what the current functionality does for you, or what maybe it's missing or could be expanded on. And I did want to just point out a few of the tools that we have to use these features. I'm doing that for each of the categories that we'll talk about. The first is there's an app to basically interact with this, the API. This one is a little bit more for kind of testing out the queries. That we have a declarative query language that we use for our web applications that you can play around with in that query playground. But we know that there are more ways. Obviously, you can also use just Postman or the web browser to interact with the API in a lot of cases. And we think that there might be some possibilities to add some more DHIS2 applications to do API exploration in the near future. The second is the data store app, which lets you, as the name implies, explore information that's stored in that schemaless data store. This supports, we have a new version of this in 42, as I mentioned on Tuesday, which supports not only the data store, but also the user data store, and supports things like sharing settings. And I can talk a little bit more at some point about some of the new features of the data store API that make it scale a lot better. It now supports querying, field filtering, sorting, pagination, for all of the keys in a particular namespace. So you can really use it as if it were similar to the metadata or data APIs that are elsewhere in DHIS2. And you can do that in a way that scales. So even if you have 10,000 keys, which starts to get unwieldy if we don't have some of these features, you can use pagination, you can use filtering, which does that filtering in the database itself. Some really cool things that we want to start to look at in introducing to this new data store app as well. And then we also have an app for managing routes, which I mentioned on Tuesday as well. I'm going to go a little bit quicker through some of this. Oh, that's not the right one. Here we go. I mentioned on the web, I mentioned web apps and plugins that we have. We now also have the ability to add shortcuts to the command palette. And I think there's going to be a lot more coming to the new global shell and the new global shell command palette, such as commands, which maybe we'll hear a little bit more about later. We have a number of tools and libraries that probably most of you know that go into how you actually build these different types of web extensions, web apps, and plugins. The app platform is a big one. It's basically a command line tool for initializing, building, testing, deploying and running a development server for a web application with plugins. App Runtime is a library that is used for React application to communicate with the DHIS2 API using that declarative query language. We have a UI library of reusable components that's available in React as well, and a library for internationalization and translation. There's also an analytics library, which is a little bit more internal, but we've seen many people start to use that as well to add some of the visualization capabilities that are in some of the core applications to their custom apps as well. If you don't want to use that library and build the visualizations up from scratch, you can also include, because the data visualizer app, the maps app, the line listing app expose plugins, which are used on the dashboard. You can embed those same plugins in your own application. So that's a really nice way to make kind of composable extensions within DHIS2 itself. Different apps can expose plugins. Those plugins can be used in other apps, and you can have a real inception, I don't know, infinite funnel of of extensions within extensions within extensions. Talked a little bit about mobile. We have the Android SDK. We also have a mobile UI library, which is actually cross-platform. So that is written in Kotlin and composed multi-platform, which allows it to be used on Android, but also in iOS and on desktop. The Android SDK is Android only at the moment, but there's a continuing effort to migrate it to Kotlin. I think it's 70 or 80% Kotlin now. And that will eventually also be able to be used in platforms that are not Android as well. We know that iOS is sometimes a requirement, though not as often as Android. And then I wanted to mention also the program rule engine, which, as we mentioned in the presentation on Tuesday, is now cross-platform. So that same engine runs in the Java backend server. It runs it's written in Kotlin, so it runs natively for Android as well. And it also has a JavaScript variant that comes from the same source. So the logic will be identical, and you can run it on the web in the Java backend or in a Kotlin mobile application. Wanted to talk a little bit about interoperability and integration. We'll get into this a little bit more with some of the reference implementations. Yeah, super. If you want to yell, I'll repeat it. Yeah, go ahead. Yes. So the question was, is the Capture App web application going to use the same rule engine? And the answer is yes. So the idea is that this will be a single rule engine. We've had a single kind of set of rules that you can use, but it's been implemented in 3 different places. Historically, it's been implemented in the Android app, in the server, and in the web front end. Obviously, the actions that come out of that can be slightly different, and some are only supported in web. For example, if you want to show a dialogue to the user, that's only going to happen when you have an interface available. But the idea is that this is used, and I believe that's close to being done. I don't know if we have anyone from the tracker team here. So it should be completely used in the front end of the Capture app as well. Any other questions? Sorry, I'm running through things.
I want to ask you the same question at the morning. Can we build up a customer or a blog or some shortcome related to e-wars?
E-wars.
Related to
the e-wars climate model, yes.
Some countries have a crisis or wars to fit the circumstances and to suit the intelligence surveillance system.
Yeah, there are many ways that you could do that. You would require some custom development, and that is something that the climate team has been working on with CHAP as well. Is a server-side extension that it also has a mobile or a front-end web application. I think that's what you're referring to, is the eWars climate model, or is that? Sorry.
It's related to a surveillance system under the crisis.
Oh yeah, emergency. Yeah. Similar, I think similar in that if it's a predictive model, it can be run in CHAP. If you want to run it yourself, you can develop a web application and use the Routes API to communicate with that backend service. We don't have a native support for that specifically, but we kind of have the building blocks to be able to implement those types of integrations yourself, if that answers your question. Speaking of integrations and interoperability, this is a big area of extension as well, and we want to Yeah, we support a lot of this in doing point-to-point integrations, integration layers, which, yeah, basically ways to integrate multiple systems. And we build a few tools such as Apache Camel and the Java SDK and the Fire IG Generator app, which you may have seen in a session yesterday. I'm going to go through this quickly because I promised Kai that he would be able to talk about plugins, which I think all of you want to hear about as well. We also have an app hub, which most of you probably know about, but this is where all of the apps that we build, as well as the community builds, can be uploaded and shared and installed very easily into a DHIS2 system. Both new apps, but also new versions of those applications. It's available at apps.dhis2.org. And this is an important one. We have a developer portal, which is the kind of the entry point to the documentation for all of these things that I've just mentioned. We have guides, we have reference material, we have yeah, reference to different events that are happening, as well as the community of practice and different places where you can bring your questions. There's also recordings from previous academies where you can watch through the entire academy for building DHIS2 web apps or Android apps and more, and kind of do that at your own pace. Speaking of the community, we have the community of practice. We have monthly meetups that everyone is welcome to join. On Thursdays, we post those on the community of practice. The next one, as I mentioned, will be next week and focused on the org unit sync reference implementation that I'll talk about in a minute. We also have a new HISP Developer Champions program, which we are trialing to really build a more high-touch connection with some of the developers in the community, and we want to expand that in the future as well. And this, I think, will help the whole community to kind of learn from each other and share the things that people are working on. And then we also have different academies and trainings, and we'll look to have more kind of bite-sized training content in the future. I'm not going to go into too much detail about these because I've already gone through them. There's been some recent technology upgrades to the app platform that Kai will talk a little bit more about how this also allows us to build plugins with the platform in a better way than we did before. The data store has been expanded with some additional functionality to make it more performant, and we have a new data store application. And for those of you who didn't see the Fire IG Generator app, we have ability to generate a Fire implementation guide from your DHIS2 metadata. So you can use your DHIS2 metadata as the source of truth and then use that as the target for different integration projects. Again, I'm not going to get too much into all of that, but feel free to ask questions. But with that, I will turn it over to Kai to talk to us a little bit about the different types of plugins that we have and how you can build them using the app platform. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, my turn to talk about plugins. Yeah, Austin mentioned it a little bit, but I think that this is a kind of new set of extensibility features that should be really useful in a lot of use cases. The idea is that there are some apps that already provide a lot of useful features, but sometimes someone needs just a little something more in, for example, the dashboard app or entering data in the capture app. And like Austin described, if you needed to fork that app to add the feature and then maintain that and your feature while the core team's developing the dashboard app, like down another path, maintaining those is going to be an untenable amount of work. And sometimes we see people make their own apps to re-implement dashboards with a particular feature that they want. And so having these extensibility points inside of these apps, which already do a lot, can be really valuable for a lot of people in their use cases. And so the first example that we have is in the dashboard app. Now it's possible to make a custom dashboard item. The example here is like this is just a weather widget, but in addition to other information that you have about malaria, you can show some weather information. This has been added to the dashboard app, I believe, recently. And I can show off a little bit that if you're using the app platform libraries, it's really easy to make this plugin. I'll skip this quickly and show that. And if you're using the same tools that you use to make regular dashboard apps, you just need to configure a few things. It's a little small here, I guess, but you set a plugin type. This one's for dashboard. You point it to your entry point in your code. And then the code for this just borrows the code from the weather widget online. And you upload that to your instance. And then when you're editing your dashboard, you can look in the pull-down menu for new items to add, and under the app section, there'll be this plugin that you made, and it's easy to add. That plugin will have access to org unit and period filters when you're viewing the dashboard. And so, say for this weather example, if you want to change the location of the weather that's displayed based on the org unit filters, you could adapt to that as people are doing, or as people are filtering on the dashboard. And to let it be a little more flexible depending on what you're using it for, you can also tell the plugin also gets the information if the user's looking at it in the edit mode or the view mode. And that can be useful, for example, say you have a particular plugin that can manage a lot of different visualizations. And when someone's setting it up, you need to pick which visualization to show on this dashboard, maybe make some data store configuration. And so the user can do that in this edit mode. When you go to the view mode, the plugin can show something else. So as I'm kind of showing these kind of current plugin points that we have, I'm kind of curious to hear if people like have ideas of like, okay, maybe this is something that is relevant to my use case. This is something that we've been thinking about adding to a dashboard but couldn't really do ourselves. And if you have, do you have an idea for that?
Hello, thank you. Tafsir Jallo from ICRC. Actually, we use this feature to implement a plugin within the dashboard. It's just a simple thing. You will have like a line list, and we just added a button to be able to open from the dashboard the Capture app or the Tracker app. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very good feature. So it will enable us to add more things directly within the dashboard. Thank you.
Nice. Yeah, that's great. Did you say it's like a kind of custom line list view that you have?
Yes, just a custom line list where we can add some filters and also options to open the line list app directly from the dashboard by selecting from the list.
Okay, yeah. Nice. That's a cool use case. And yeah, there's the built-in line listing app, I think, is now considered a core app that can do some jobs, but it sounds like maybe there's something else.
In this case, this was linking to the Capture app, right? So you're actually linking into the data entry for those particular units. So it's more like a working list on the dashboard. Line listing is coming from analytics, but yeah, very cool.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. So that's this is one plugin point that we have now. There's a couple more that we have currently. In addition to the dashboard and the Capture app, when you're doing the data entry form, you can add particular special fields. I'll show an example of that. And in the context of a reference implementation that we have. And also in the Capture app, when you're viewing an enrollment dashboard, you can set up a kind of custom view in there too. So in the Capture app, we have this example that's available on the App Hub. A master's student worked with HISP Sri Lanka to develop this growth monitoring chart. And so when you're viewing a patient's data, you can visualize their kind of physical dimensions as they grow and compare them to kind of standards to see where they are relative to these norms. So this is a custom plugin that someone made, or these groups made for their dashboards. And you can see their enrollment dashboards. And you can see that as you add some data with some new dimensions, these kinds of things will then be reflected back in that other view there. And so you can get this custom analysis that you might want for a particular patient. Now you can see this fourth data point here. Another area in the Capture app is in these in the form fields. We have a reference implementation here. Say, for example, you want to connect your instance to a civil registry where instead of typing in a patient's data every time someone comes to you, you can search up their national ID, and that will fill in some values in the form, and you kind of can use that civil registry for a source of truth for people's information. Let's see. I believe Austin will talk more about this. This is in the Capture app. Yeah, this is a program that's set up to use a plugin for this national ID field. And so this isn't built into DHIS2, but you can customize, you can build a plugin here and add it and customize it to, it'll get access to be able to modify these other fields here. Like you can see that when you search here, it populates the name, last name, sex, date of birth fields here. And that can be a pretty useful workflow to kind of supplement your entry forms.
And in this case, this is using the Routes API to actually communicate with that civil registry. It's using a middleware as well. We'll talk about this a little bit more later, but specifically in here, everything else is just the Capture app. So everything that the Capture app does still works, and just that one line there where you have national ID with the search, that is a custom plugin that you can build. So it's very small amount of work to build that little extension, and then that has a lot of power to be able to communicate with this civil registry, look up the based on this number, fill in the demographic information for that particular patient.
Yeah, thanks. And so there's a lot of interesting things that you can do on these fields, maybe, or in these forms. Maybe perform some custom validation that you're interested in, or talk to another service, maybe like sync with another DHIS2 instance. There's a lot of options that you can do with this. There is an app that helps configure these custom Capture form field plugins. And this is available on the App Hub too. This kind of shows a little example of you need to set up some parameters so that they can talk to each other. The plugin can't modify the form willy-nilly. You get to choose what kind of information it gets about the form around it and what it can modify. So this is the tracker plugin configurator on the App Hub. So those are the extension points that we have in apps right now. We have some more kind of in progress now and coming up, and we're interested to hear if you have other ideas on these too. But one big one will be in the data entry app. We want to make a plugin point here so that you can, when you're entering data, you can make whatever you want, any kind of full app to be the form that you want. Also in the command palette, which will be the kind of new app navigation menu, we can make things like, say for example, anywhere in the instance when you open the menu, you can do person search and then search up a tracked entity, maybe go to their enrollment page, maybe do some actions relevant to them, and have a plugin that's available in the header bar at all times. Also in the dashboard app, having the full dashboard could be useful. Say you make dashboards in Power BI or something, and you want to kind of embed that in there or some special way. And then also in the Capture app, soon there will be plugins for row-based data entry. And please do let us know if you have other ideas for places and apps that you want to add a feature, but would be, yeah, one second, but it would be like untenable to fork the app.
Thank you for these plugins. Maybe another idea in the maintenance app, especially the organization units, because sometimes when you create the organization unit and you have another registry already, to be able to add a plugin to go and fetch the data from this registry. That can be interesting also.
That is a very cool idea. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think that maybe we've talked about maintenance app plugins where you can either override a particular page to add kind of custom functionality for configuring your metadata or add more pages. Like say there's something else in your app that you want to configure or in your instance, but doesn't live in the maintenance app yet, to add an additional page in there that like, okay, this is where you go to set up your configuration. So yeah, org units. That's awesome. Thank you for the idea. Noted. That's it for plugins. I see we're getting maybe a little short on time. I'll go quickly through the next thing, which is that now in version 42, we have this new thing, which is a global app shell. This is kind of a wrapper for all of the apps in the instance. There will be one this one wrapper that provides the header bar and the command palette and the new app navigation menu. And every app is loaded inside of it very much like a plugin. And so it's a little bit of a new architecture for how we kind of load apps, but it has some nice features that it can provide us. For example, we wanted to deploy this new app navigation menu and the command palette that comes with it and the shortcuts that come with it. And it needs to go to all of the apps at once. With this wrapper, we can do that by just updating the wrapper, and then all of the apps are updated. Previously, that would have had to be done in every one of the 34 core apps and every app that someone had custom on their instance. And in the future, it'll provide us some nice kind of subtle tech benefits. Like we can improve the security of how apps behave and maybe the performance as we like consolidate features from the apps into the top there. But it can be maybe useful for people if they want to customize their own header bar or presentation in their instance. I have to add a disclaimer that that's not easy to do right now. The global shell does a lot of things, but isn't really done in a generalizable or kind of recomposable way yet. But that's something that we want to do. It also introduces, this new header bar design with a new profile menu that you'll see in version 42. And this is the new app navigation thing. So we can see our new apps. We can see that there are shortcuts and commands that'll be available if we want to use those shortcuts. But currently that's implemented with the maintenance app. So if you search in the menu for a particular page in the maintenance app, you can go right there. So you can see categories, data elements. You can go to organization units from here. And this is made in a way that any app can add these shortcuts so that they can turn up in this navigation menu. So it's pretty easy to configure. Soon there'll even be translatable shortcuts, but you just need to customize in your app a particular URL and a name that will turn up in the shortcuts, and then you can take advantage of that too. Let's see. That was that. Then we have a few features in the App Hub and App Management section to kind of make life easier when you're managing your apps and choosing new ones. Now you can see what's new in the latest versions of the app. This clears up a lot of mysteries about what you're looking at when you look at the latest versions in the App Hub. You can manually edit these to kind of write whatever you want that are new in the changes, and this will be helpful if you're publishing apps on the App Hub to publicize what your app does and why people should upgrade to the latest version. I think this is an upcoming feature that we will display which plugins are available in each app, or if an app is just a plugin. So this will kind of facilitate the kind of plugin ecosystem within apps. That's what I have for my sections here. I'll hand it back to Austin.
Thanks, Kai. And I won't spend too much time on this because we don't have too many minutes left, but wanted to talk about a few of the new features of the Routes API. Again, the Routes API allows DHIS2 to serve as an authentication and authorization proxy for trusted upstream services. This is generally what it looks like. The browser talks to DHIS2 through the DHIS2 API. It then adds some authentication to be able to tell the upstream service that it's DHIS2 that's talking to it, and routes the response back to the user. Previously, we've had, obviously you can communicate with something that doesn't have authentication, but assuming your backend service does have authentication, we've had HTTP basic auth and DHIS2 API tokens available to communicate with that backend service. And we've now added some new ones, which I think are quite useful. And I'll talk about the OAuth use case in particular in that civil registry reference implementation that Kai brought up already. So there's different ways that this works. Obviously, you can look at these slides later and see kind of how it works. This one is the new one in 42, which allows DHIS2 to be a client, an OAuth client, communicate with an OAuth identity server, get back a token, and then use that token to communicate with the resource. So it'll do all of that transparently for you. You give it a client ID and a client secret. It then, when it gets a request in from the user, communicates with basically uses that ID and secret to get a token from the token server, and then adds that token to the upstream request. Once that token expires, it'll get a new one from the auth server as well. So coming also in version 42, which is out now, we have the ability to customize the timeouts for this routes API. So previously there was a limit on the number of requests that you could make and the timeouts there. It's now non-blocking and streaming, so you can do a lot more and also customize if you need quite long timeouts for downloading large payloads or communicating with a slow backend upstream. And the system administrator can authorize only certain requests or certain routes to be configured in the system. So that you have support for the system administrator who has access to the DHIS2 conf file to say, I only want routes to be able to go to localhost, or I only want routes to be able to go to this specific IP address that I know is where there is a backend service that I trust that we can communicate. And this is kind of a security in depth, defense in depth for the routes API, because you can also specify only certain users to be able to configure routes in the system. And then the system administrator can kind of provide the network rules to be able to say which locations that route can target. Final thing I wanted to talk about here is the reference implementations that we've mentioned. And so this is a new thing that we've been working on in the last year with this extensibility team. And I wanted to mention the two that we've done so far. More are coming soon. The first one was a civil registry lookup, which we did working with a particular implementation that needed this. And we wanted to build it in a way that could be reused in other locations as well. So the idea is that in this case, this was before 42 was out, so we didn't have that OAuth support in the routes API itself. We needed to build a middleware. We used the Camel DHIS2 component and built this on top of Apache Camel, which is an open source integration technology, which basically did that OAuth lookup with the token server and then communicated with a civil registry. As we saw, the kind of end result of this being in a capture plugin, you can click search. That's going through the routes API to this middleware, getting a token from the token server, going to the backend civil registry service, doing that search, and then sending the response back to the end user. This is a reference implementation of this, so obviously you might need to change it or adapt it to your particular implementation. But the idea is that this should generally work out of the box, and you can take the code and adapt it to your particular implementation, hopefully without a lot of work. That's the idea of these reference implementations. It's kind of showing how something can be done and letting a developer or a team take that and just make the small tweaks that they need to make it work in their system. So we've done this for the civil registry plugin that was using a number of the components that we described today, the capture plugins, API routes, Camel middleware, and we'll soon be updating this reference implementation to also use that new capability of the routes API, which will eliminate the need for that Camel middleware at all. So you basically can just use a capture plugin, install it from the App Hub, or modify that slightly, and then be able to communicate with a civil registry that's protected with OAuth using the routes API that we have built in 42. The other one that I wanted to talk about, or just tease, because we'll talk about this more next week in the developer meetup on Thursday, is a very exciting org unit sync reference implementation. There's a lot of different ways to do this. We've seen many people do it, but we wanted to do it ourselves and give a kind of a baseline that people could take and adapt to their different systems, and try to build it in a way that was robust and had addressed a lot of the common requirements that we saw in different implementations. So this has a pub-sub model where basically you're pulling information from the DHIS2 database, so it's very robust in that sense. So we're using actually logical replication slots to have a trigger when something happens in one of the org unit tables. You can also take this reference implementation and adapt it to different metadata objects if you want to sync things that are not org units. It then fetches the information from DHIS2 API to get the full kind of enriched information about that particular org unit, including org unit groups, org unit group sets, all different kind of related resources, puts that onto a durable queue so that it doesn't get lost. And then a consumer can pull from that queue and say, okay, I'm going to take this event that happened, and I'm going to send out synchronization of that particular event to all of these one or more target systems, which are additional DHIS2 servers, or they could be not DHIS2 servers as well, that you want to basically synchronize that event to. And this is robust in a number of different ways, in where the event is sourced from, as well as how it is put onto a queue. It has retry behavior if things fail. It also has notifications to the source and target servers to be able to say this synchronization worked, the synchronization has issues. It also has the optional ability to create approval workflows if you want to have one or more people approve a change before it is synchronized to all the downstream servers or specific downstream servers. It also has the ability to do mappings for certain downstream servers. Maybe there's a server that is in a particular language and you don't want to overwrite the name for that, for any synchronization that happens in the upstream service, for that name that is particular to that instance. You can kind of mask out different information from that synchronization if you want to. We'll learn more about this. You can see it with lots of great documentation as well in on the link that is there. So there's a really great documentation talking through all of the details of how this is implemented, the different features that are there. We'll be expanding on this as well. And Claude from the extensibility team will be talking about it on the developer meetup that's next week. So hopefully you can join that and learn a bit more if it's something that interests you. There's lots of interesting things in this reference implementation, and we're really curious to see how people want to use it or adapt it or questions that they have about the features that we have there. I think we're just out of time, but hopefully that was a whirlwind tour of the different developer tools that we have and where to find them. There were many that we didn't go into detail about because we just wanted to focus on kind of some of the newer ones and things that are interesting. But hopefully you learned something, and feel free to come up and talk with Kai or myself, or send us an email as well if you would like to, if you have any questions. Thank you very much.